Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies, and today I want to tell you about some of the manliest motherfucking movies currently available on Prime Video. $999? 1,000. Oh, that's a deep burn. So, today we're going to be talking about the manliest movies you can currently watch on Prime Video. These are movies included with your Prime membership. And this video is going to contain 20 movies plus a couple of honorable mentions. There's some great hidden gem movies on this list, as well as some of my favorite movies of all time. And this video is sponsored by Universal Yums, and I'll tell you more about their great service halfway through this video. But let's go ahead and start all the way back at number 20 with a hidden gem called The Hollow Point. Now this one was on Netflix for quite a while, and I had talked about it in some previous videos, but this is a crime movie that takes place on the border. Whereas most crime movies that take place around there, they have to do with drugs and money. This actually has to do with arms dealing, specifically like cop killing bullets. And it's got a really incredible cast, especially for a movie you probably haven't heard of. Patrick Wilson leads this one off. I always like him, he's a great actor. But Ian McShane plays a really good role. John Leguizamo is an absolute badass in this movie. And Jim Belushi actually has a really cool role as well. All great stuff. I do kind of understand why this is a little bit of an unknown movie. It's got a little bit of a wet fart fizzle towards the end, but I felt like all of it was really good. I think Breaking Bad fans are gonna find a lot to love with this movie. Another one that takes place on the border that did get a wide release, but I think is still underappreciated for what it is Rambo: Last Blood. Now, I love the Rambo movies, particularly the first one, and I had no interest in seeing this latest installment. Even though I am a big fan of Stallone, I just didn't think it was going to be very much. While it's very different from the other Rambo movies, I was surprised at how good this one is. It's very dark, very gritty. It is upsetting. This is not just one to watch casually, even though it is a little bit of a mindless action movie, so there's a little bit of a polarity there that doesn't quite work 100%, which is the only reason I have it so far back. But Stallone is great in it. It's got some really great action that kicks off after a pretty slow start, but still an interesting story, and it almost could stand alone. They could have named it something else, or he could have been a different character and not really been Rambo, but there would have been too many comparisons to make, I think. Some really cool stuff in this movie, but it is a bloodbath ultimately. But if you clicked on this video and you want to watch just something testosterone fueled with a lot of blood and a lot of bullets, Rambo: Last Blood is a really great way to go.
Beware. Schwarzenegger got a raw deal, and now he means business.
Now we jump from Stallone to Schwarzenegger with one of his lesser known movies, Raw Deal. And this one he plays a cop. Not really an ex-cop, but he plays kind of an exiled cop that works his way back into organized crime in an undercover operation. And this one has some bizarrely manly stuff. This is one of the funnier Schwarzenegger movies, and not done in a comedy, but it's also not stupid and silly. It's got this just, for lack of a better word, raw masculinity to it. And yes, some of it's silly, but it's got this 80s vibe that works. Again, it's not a comedy, but it's just fun to watch some of the stuff. If you want to watch just like a vintage Schwarzenegger movie that is solid all around, but that oozes that 80s cheese that I've talked about in previous videos, that 80s cheese that comes out of a compressed air can, that kind of cheese, Raw Deal is coated in it, but it's still just a badass Schwarzenegger movie. All right, now for a complete change of pace, The Lost City of Z is actually an Amazon original. This got a small theatrical release, but this is based on the true story of explorers who really went far, far down the Amazon and discovered basically lost civilizations. Any kind of movies about these explorers is just some of the most masculine stuff you can do. And this movie doesn't overdo it, but it's got a great cast with Charlie Hunnam and Robert Pattinson. And it's beautiful. It's really beautifully directed. And then just the nature of that type of exploration, just jumping blindly into like one of the most dangerous parts of the world, not just because the tribesmen there wanted to kill them, but just the dangerous wildlife and the plant life and just the absolute risk of like a painful, slow death that they were facing. And just jumping into it just to discover something new. It is just one of the manliest things I can think of. And on top of that, it's just really a beautiful movie. It is slow paced. It's that type of a film. But if you're the least bit interested in historical dramas or the nature of those types of explorers, which are basically gone now, The Lost City of Z is a must watch for you.
What? What? What?
Now, The Lighthouse was one of the more talked about movies that came out in 2019, and fair warning up front, this is not a movie for everybody, and to be totally honest, I'm not sure if this movie is for me. I've seen it twice, I don't fully understand it, but think The Shining meets God knows what, like Salvador Dali, surrealist films or something. It's wild stuff, but this is actually from the same director as The Witch. And even though The Witch was a very polarizing movie and people hated it or loved it, I think even less people will love The Lighthouse. But for those that do latch onto this movie, I think they really seem to love it a lot. I'm warning you a lot because I'm not necessarily recommending many of you to go watch it. However, it's beautifully shot, incredible cinematography with this one, and then there's just these sort of amazing performances between Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson, and it's just about sort of cabin fever and insanity. It's wild, wild stuff. It's got some H.P. Lovecraft elements. It's dark nature though. So make sure you're in the right mood for it, but also make sure you're the targeted audience for it. If it doesn't sound like it's for you, I can guarantee you that it's not. I normally wouldn't do that, but with this movie, I know it's the case. But if anything that I've said sounds really interesting to you, it's gonna be worth the risk of hating this movie for you to see if maybe you love it, because I know some of you will. It's a small percentage with this one.
Be thou consumed by the fires that
Dragon Slayer is a really fantastic movie from 1981. If you like anything sort of fantasy wise, odds are you've seen it, and if you haven't, this needs to be the first one that you watch. This is an incredible movie. It's about a wizard's apprentice who is sent off to slay this giant dragon. One of the great things about this is it's all done with practical effects, and the dragon is amazing looking, the sets are incredible, and it's just this amazing story about this guy having to go fight this dragon, this very small, sort of David and Goliath type of a story. And then it gets pretty wild too. It's not like this little tiny movie from 1981. This was a big movie. It's just time has forgotten it a little bit, and especially if you're one of my younger viewers, and I say younger, I mean if you're my age or younger, there's a very good chance you missed this movie, and it's fantastic, and it's just hiding out over on Prime right now.
Jesus! It's piss.
For a major change of pace, Deathgasm is actually directed by the same guy who did Guns Akimbo, which just came out recently, and I have watched and reviewed it on the channel before. I like Deathgasm way better. I liked Guns Akimbo, but Deathgasm is insane. This is gonna appeal to fans of Shaun of the Dead, things like that. This is about some metalhead kids who have a garage band, and they manage to summon a bunch of demons. You can basically think it's like a zombie movie, but they're demons in this movie, and this just has some great metal references, some great practical effects, as well as just some funny moments like a dildo fight. This is an adult movie, and it's bloody and it's gory, but it is a ton of fun. Get the Gringo stars Mel Gibson, and it's one of those movies that he sort of tried to do a comeback with that just did not get a lot of notoriety, but it deserves way more eyeballs than I think it's gotten over the years, and it is developing a little bit of a following. In this movie, he is a bank robber sent to this prison in Mexico, and it's a very odd prison setup where like families are living with men incarcerated there, and apparently this was a real thing. From my understanding is that they've done away with that, but at the time that this movie was made, this was a real thing, or at least it had just recently been done away with. It's gnarly stuff, so it's like this small city inside this prison, and Mel Gibson plays this very capable, almost MacGyver type of a guy that just knows what to do and when to do it and how to play the system, and it's really fun watching him try to figure out how to get out of this prison. It's a great prison escape movie that's very different from any other prison escape movie you've probably ever seen. It's a little more fantastic, but that's what makes it so fun.
Oh, thank you, Jesus.
That is the last time you do this to me, Markin.
Now, my next is one of my favorite, lesser-known Martin Scorsese movies, Bringing Out the Dead. This stars Nicolas Cage, as well as some other great actors like John Goodman, Ving Rhames. Patricia Arquette has a role that's a little grating, but I think it's kind of supposed to be. So I actually think this is one of Nicolas Cage's better performances. He's really wild in this one, but it works. This is actually based on a book written by a New York ambulance driver. And it's really just about sort of this like psychosis that he fell into, where he's like not sleeping, he's dealing with people that are dying all the time. This one's dark and heavy stuff, but it's different from a lot of the other dark movies. There's other stuff that I find entertaining that's dark, and this one's got a little bit of a mental health angle, but not in the way that a lot of others. This one's just got its own unique flavor. Scorsese has this really kind of beautiful, polished thing going on with this one, where things are like kind of glossy and glowy, yet you're in this sort of like underbelly of New York, sort of, you know, dealing with people who are sick and dying. It's really intense stuff, but it's also this really interesting look at the life of a ambulance driver in a big city where they're constantly getting calls, and then there's just the other great performances that go along with it, and it's just sort of long but interesting story as well. If you've never seen it, doesn't matter if you're a Nicolas Cage fan or a Scorsese fan, I recommend this movie. If you find that you like a lot of my recommendations, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by this one if you've never seen it. And then the last one in my bottom 10 I've talked about recently, but it fits squarely on this list. It's Harry Brown starring Michael Caine. Now in this one, you get a little bit of a Death Wish type of a thing, where he's basically a vigilante and he's cleaning up his neighborhood, which is never really a good idea, but it plays out really well in this movie. I love seeing Michael Caine sort of in this more raw, edgy format. He does a great job with it, and he's not like a total badass like some of the guys in these other movies. I mean, he is, but it's in a different way. It feels very real. Harry Brown can be an upsetting movie, but it's very, very well done. Obviously, Michael Caine is a great actor in it, as he is in everything, but some of the supporting cast are spookily good. There's some villains in this movie that are just really great, and it's ultimately just very well written, very well produced. It is dark like some of the other ones, but man, Michael Caine is a badass in it, just not in the same way that some of the other guys are in the movies we've talked about so far. Now, before moving on to my top 10, Universal Yums was a sponsor last month, and the response from you guys was so strong. I'm keeping them on for another month. They sent me another box. This one's from the Philippines. The last one was from Scandinavia. And there was a ton of stuff in here. There's chips, there's crackers, there's cookies, there's chocolate, there's gummies, there's candy, there's all sorts of great stuff and packed into this box. It's amazing. And not only are all the treats delicious, but it comes with little games and trivia and facts about all the stuff and where it comes from, where it originated, and it's just a fun experience. You're not just sort of eating snacks, it's a total experience. And right now, we can't go out and have experiences outside of our own home, and this is sort of this worldly experience that you get to enjoy at home for a very reasonable price. It costs less than a night out would have, and me and the missus make it a fantastic night out. We actually just did a date night live stream where we showed everything and tasted everything in our Universal Yums box. You can check that live stream out retroactively if you're interested. It was a ton of fun, and I think you'll have a lot of fun opening up your box and sort of making an evening out of it. It's a great way to break up the monotony right now. I don't know where the next box is coming from, but I can't wait to get mine. There is a link in the description as well as a link in the top comment, and that top comment includes all the movies listed in this, but follow the link. There are 3 different boxes at 3 different price points, and each month it comes from a different region of the world, and I'm looking forward to my next box.
Lean back.
Tread right there.
bracing. This is gonna penetrate.
Okay, now we kick off my top 10 with one of the just butchest movies to have come out in recent memory, and somehow I managed to find 9 movies manlier than Bone Tomahawk. Now, a lot of you have seen this and have talked about how gruesome one of the deaths is in this movie. While this isn't an overly gruesome movie throughout, there are moments in this movie that are going to curdle your blood. It's intense, but this is a really fantastic Western led off by Kurt Russell, who's one of my favorite actors. There's another Kurt Russell movie coming up further down this list, one of my favorites of all time. But Bone Tomahawk has got this hard edge to it. It takes a while getting in, but it's well worth the wait. There is payoff for the wait, and it's not a boring wait. It's an interesting Western. It's shot well. There's a lot of interesting supporting characters in this as well. Patrick Wilson is in this also, as well as Matthew Fox and some other faces you're gonna recognize, but I'm just warning you, this one is intense, but it's good. I still remember it. It's been a while since I've seen it, and there are visuals in this movie burned in my brain, but that's not the only reason to watch it. It is a good movie. I'm in love with this director and the stuff that he's putting out. In fact, I've got another one of his movies further down this list as well. Now, one that almost all of you have probably seen is the Boondock Saints. Now, I do have to say, this is not as good of a movie in terms of the quality of the filmmaking and the production as most of the other movies we've talked about on the list so far, but it's in this place because it is so fun and it's so accessible. So many people seem to love this movie, myself included. Not only is this sort of a fun movie about these two sort of vigilante brothers, it's got a really cool backstory where Troy Duffy, the writer, wrote it in a spiral-bound notebook, and then he was able to sell it, and he got the deed to his favorite bar as part of the deal for making this movie. And this and the sequel, which is not really as good, are the only movies he's ever made. As a film buff, I love stories like that, and the Boondock Saints is fun to watch, and then it's just fun to learn about as well.
Are you still with me?
Yeah.
Now, I've been a longtime fan of my next pick, Way of the Gun. This is a modern day Western. I say modern day, this movie's almost 20 years old now, but it's very much like a Western. If you take away the cars and replace them with horses, you've got a good old-fashioned Western movie. Benicio del Toro and Ryan Phillippe star in this movie, as well as some other great people like Juliette Lewis and James Caan. Taye Diggs has a really great supporting role as one of the security guards. And in this one, these two criminals kidnap a pregnant woman who is a surrogate for a rich family in order to hold her and the baby ransom. It's a great, interesting story. It develops really well. It's got some great sequences, particularly the heist sequence where they kidnap her is very interesting, but it all sort of climaxes with this amazing shootout, and it's not like a quick shootout. This is a long shootout sequence. It's a famous shootout sequence at this point in time. The opening sequence is a famous sequence where Sarah Silverman has one of the dirtiest mouths ever in a movie. It's really fantastic. So this one's fun, and it's edgy, and it's gritty, and it just sort of oozes this raw masculinity. All great stuff. Another really strong Darren Van Dam recommendation. All right, so we had a lot of fun talking about Bone Tomahawk, and that director did a movie I like even more, starring Vince Vaughn, called Brawl at Cell Block 99. Movies like this are the reason I made this particular list. This one is amazing to me. It's fairly long, it's a little over 2 hours, and the interesting thing about this is while the first half is fairly slow, I find it all interesting, but it's slow paced. There is a point in the middle of this movie where things completely change and you get a completely different movie in the second half. It's very well put together. Vince Vaughn is really great in this. He's very convincing as this sort of like stoic badass. And then you get some great supporting roles as well, like Don Johnson is this prison warden of this Red Leaf prison. I loved this one. This was one of my favorite movies the year it came out, and it was severely overlooked. But that director has gone on to do another one with Vince Vaughn and Mel Gibson called Dragged Across Concrete, which I believe is on Cinemax currently, so get your hands on that if you have the chance, because Bone Tomahawk, Brawl in Cell Block 99, and Dragged Across Concrete, While they're not really connected, they do make kind of a great trilogy together from that director. Now, one from the 70s that I know a lot of you have probably not seen is called Wake in Fright. This is an Australian film about this teacher who's trying to go home and gets sort of sidetracked rather, in this little town that is comprised almost exclusively of men. Everyone's drinking super heavily and gambling. That's all that's going on in this town, and he cannot manage to escape this town. This movie is about raw masculinity. That is what it's about. And not in like a progressive, toxic masculinity way, even though that is an element. This one just, it somehow was managed to distill sort of this element of being a man that's kind of unique and extrapolate it and tell this really bizarre story about this guy who cannot escape the grips of it as it sort of destroys his life, and as he sees it already having destroyed the lives of the people around him. It's very interesting. This is a fun movie to have a couple of beers with. It does get dark, and I will have to say there is a disclaimer for anyone who's sensitive to anything happening to animals. There is a kangaroo hunting sequence where you see a lot of kangaroos shot. Now, this is something that's apparently done on a regular basis in parts of Australia, or at least it was. It's called the cull. They did film the cull and worked it into the movie. It's important in the movie, and just being aware that that was a practice is also, I think, important to know. You Were Never Really Here is another criminally overlooked movie. This is also a Netflix original. It stars Joaquin Phoenix, and I think it was the last movie he did before Joker, and it's a vastly different character, but he's a total badass here, and he's easily 60, 70 maybe pounds heavier than he was in the Joker, maybe more. He's thick in this movie, and in this movie, he rescues kids that have been sold into sex trafficking, and he does so with some pretty brutal tactics, one of which includes a ball-peen hammer. There's not a lot of dialogue in this one. It's slow paced, but it's gritty, it's rough, it's raw, and this is done by a female director. There's a lot of people sort of, for lack of a better word, bitching about there not being enough female directors and this and that. There are plenty, and they're doing really fantastic movies like this one, yet they get ignored and overlooked. This is an amazing little movie that really got severely overlooked. Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead did the score for this. There's a lot of great elements here. This is more for my art film crowd because it is slow paced, but it's beautiful. I think people who like Paul Thomas Anderson's films will really be surprised by this one. Now, a classic on the list, we're getting to the top of the list, so we got these like long-lasting staple classics, one of which being The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. This is from the Dollars trilogy or the Man from No Name trilogy, which I think is an amazing trilogy to watch together, and possibly the most famous Clint Eastwood Western, and that says a lot. There are some amazing Clint Eastwood Westerns, but this is probably the pinnacle, and for good reason. It's really fantastic. This is directed by Sergio Leone, and his work went on to influence iconic directors like Quentin Tarantino. Quentin Tarantino would not be making movies the way he makes them if it was not for Sergio Leone's work in this movie and some of his others. And The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the most accessible one. It's the one everybody should watch. If you've never seen it and you consider yourself to be a movie lover, you have to watch this movie. Now, there are two Death Wish movies. There's actually quite a few on Prime Video right now, but there's two called Death Wish. The others are all sequels. One stars Bruce Willis, and it's a remake of the original, and I don't think it's a terrible movie. However, the original Death Wish, starring Charles Bronson, is one of the most masculine movies ever made, and it's very dark subject matter. There's a very horrific rape scene in this movie, and the rape is actually carried out by none other than Jeff Goldblum. It's one of his earlier roles, and it's the catalyst for this sort of vigilante movie, and I think the rest of the movie handles everything very respectfully. It doesn't turn into sort of this like silly, vigilante movie. It's fairly serious, and it's handled in a fairly realistic way. Now, the sequels sort of didn't continue that element, but the original is just a really great movie, and it's held up over time. Its remake, which is also on Prime Video right now, is another one that while I get that Eli Roth did a little bit of different stuff with it, I don't feel like it's a very necessary movie because the original just holds up so well.
10 days isolation, Hiltz.
Captain Hiltz.
20 days.
Right. Oh, you'll still be here when I get out.
Cooler.
Now, if you watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood last year and you liked it, there's a great, brilliant The Great Escape reference. I love that sequence from that movie. And I love it because The Great Escape is such a good, iconic movie. We talked about Get the Gringo with this sort of amazing prison escape. This one's even better. This movie also stars Charles Bronson and has so many elements going on. There's some fun, lighthearted elements. There's some action, a famous, iconic motorcycle chase, and then also just this amazing tunneling prison escape. Just an amazing movie to watch. If you've never seen it, now is a great time. If you're stuck at home and you need over 2 hours to burn, The Great Escape is a fantastic way to spend that time. And before we wrap up with my number one pick, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, here are a few honorable mentions. Another Sergio Leone movie is called Duck You Sucker. While this has a different cast than the Man with No Name trilogy, it's really fantastic. You can see a lot of the inspiration for Tarantino's later work in this movie, so fans of Tarantino should definitely watch this movie. It does also go by another name, Fistful of Dynamite, but it's the exact same movie. Braven stars everyone's favorite guy right now, Jason Momoa, and he is a badass in this movie. I actually enjoyed this one as much as Aquaman, and I thought Aquaman was pretty fantastic. It was just a little dumb at parts, and so is Braven, but it's just this fun action movie. It's got elements of movies like Cliffhanger. They're out in the snow. He's this really capable guy that's taking these guys out that are sort of hunting him and his family down. It's that simple, nothing else to it. This is just an easily consumable little action movie that came out right around the same time as Aquaman, but just it didn't get a lot of fanfare. If you missed it and you're a fan of his, this one's well worth checking out. Papillon is actually a remake of a very famous Steve McQueen, Dustin Hoffman movie by the same name. This is a true story. It's actually based on a book. It's actually based on memoirs of the guy who went through it, but it's about a man who's thrown into prisons in French Polynesia. They're stuck on these islands. The original is a really amazing movie. I love it. It's epic, it's sweeping. And the thing about the remake is, while it's not a shot-for-shot remake, it's almost a scene-for-scene remake, and it's beautifully shot too. It just seems a little unnecessary to me because they didn't necessarily improve upon it. However, if you've never seen the original, I highly recommend checking it out. But this is a good movie. It is good. I'm just not sure why they made it. And now for my number one pick. I mentioned Kurt Russell was in another movie. He hasn't been in another movie yet, so it's a Kurt Russell movie. It's a John Carpenter movie. There are three with him that are all fantastic, but this one is Escape from New York. Now, I love everything about this movie. I love the story. I love the look of it. I love the character of Snake Plissken. It's just a total Darren Van Dam flick, and it's one of the manliest movies ever made. James Cameron was actually the production artist on this one as well. This was sort of right before he started directing movies and went on to be one of the most famous sci-fi directors of all time. John Carpenter's original story is great. Lee Van Cleef from Good, the Bad, and the Ugly has a really great role here, as well as Ernest Borgnine and some others. Just a ton of fun, crazy 80s action. And there's so many good movies that I love today that would not exist if not for this crazy movie. I think The Dark Knight Rises took some cues from this movie, and you can just see it all over the place. When I watch movies like this, yes, they feel old and dated at this point. This one holds up surprisingly well, but you also have to think about the fact that nothing like this had been made before it. It was completely new, and that just blows my mind. If you put yourself in a movie theater in the 1980s watching this movie, it's just an amazing experience to watch, and it's a ton of fun. It's just entertaining from beginning to end. I absolutely love it. But that's it for this list. Let me know in the comments which movies you plan on watching or which ones you look forward to watching most. And also help me thank the Patreon supporters. I would not be able to do this without their support. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, check out the link in the description, look at the details and see if that's something for you. But I will keep making videos like this one as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for watching this one, and you will see me on the next one.